All right, so picture this. You're in a world, and everyone thinks that every swan is white.
Every single one.
Then suddenly, bam,
Yeah.
you see a black swan. It really makes you rethink things, right?
Definitely makes you question what you thought you knew.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're diving into today.
That feeling of surprise, the unexpected.
Exactly.
Mm.
We're talking about these black swan events that Nassim Nicholas Taleb writes about in his book, The Black Swan, the impact of the highly improbable.
It's a book that really gets you thinking differently about the world.
Oh, absolutely. And we had a ton of requests from you all to really dig into this one.
Yeah, to unpack it.
Yeah, so that's our mission today. A deep dive into black swan events.
Sounds good to me.
So before we get too far, let's make sure we're all on the same page.
Definitely need to define things.
What exactly are these black swan events?
Well, they're these events that are totally unpredictable beforehand, and they have a huge impact.
So not just like your everyday little surprise.
No, we're talking big stuff, things that completely change how we see the world.
Like Taleb's example of the turkey.
Oh yeah, the turkey who's totally clueless about Thanksgiving.
Every day is just food and happiness. Then boom, Thanksgiving arrives.
Poor turkey had no idea what was coming.
It's a pretty funny image, but it makes you think.
It really shows how our view of the world can be so different from what's actually going on.
Like we could be those turkeys walking around totally oblivious to some huge event that's about to change everything.
It's a little unsettling when you think about it that way.
Definitely makes you wonder why we're so bad at seeing these things coming.
Right. You'd think with all the information and technology we have nowadays,
All the experts and data.
we'd be better at predicting the future, but that's not really the case, is it?
Nope, not even close. So what's the deal? Why are our brains so bad at this?
Well, the thing is, our brains are wired to see patterns even when they're not really there.
Oh yeah, we love to connect the dots.
Exactly. We crave order, we want to make sense of things, so we try to fit events into neat little stories.
Even if those stories aren't really true.
Exactly, and that leads us right into some of the mental traps that Taleb talks about in the book.
Those traps that make us blind to black swans.
Exactly, like confirmation bias.
Right.
Like this, we tend to look for information that confirms what we already believe.
Even if what we believe is wrong.
Even then, it's like we're filtering out anything that doesn't fit our worldview.
So even with access to tons of information,
We can still end up in our own little echo chambers.
stuck in our own ways.
Exactly. And then there's the narrative fallacy.
Oh yeah, that one sounds interesting.
Well, it's our tendency to oversimplify things, to squeeze complex events into simple stories.
Makes sense. We love a good story.
We do, but it can be dangerous because reality is often messy and unpredictable.
Not as neat and tidy as we want it to be.
Exactly, and that's why we fall for those get-rich-quick schemes or those too-good-to-be-true promises.
Because we're drawn to the simple story, even if it doesn't make sense logically.
It all comes back to that desire for a predictable world.
A world without black swans.
Exactly, but Taleb doesn't stop there. He takes it a step further with this idea of scalable versus non-scalable events.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting.
This is where we start to see how some things can spiral out of control in a way that we don't always expect. So we tend to think that all information behaves the same way.
Like, one piece of data is just as predictable as another.
Right. But that's not really true.
So what's the difference?
Well, some things have limits. They're non-scalable.
Okay, so like a person's height can only get so tall.
Exactly. Or the number of people you can fit in a room, there's a physical limit.
Makes sense. So what about things that are scalable?
Those are the things that can grow exponentially with no real upper bound.
Like what?
Think about wealth or the spread of an idea or a virus.
Oh, wow. So those things can just keep growing and growing.
Exactly. And that's where things get really tricky because the traditional ways we measure risk.
They don't really account for that kind of explosive growth.
Exactly. Like Taleb talks about calculating average wealth. It seems simple enough.
Yeah. Add up everyone's wealth and divide by the number of people.
But it can be super misleading.
Why?
Because wealth is scalable. A few billionaires can skew the entire average.
So the average might look high, but most people are nowhere near that level.
Exactly. It's a classic example of applying non-scalable thinking to a scalable phenomenon.
Okay, so that's a big mistake.
Huge mistake. And it leads to those massive surprises, those black swan events.
Like a sudden market crash or a viral trend that explodes out of nowhere.
Precisely, those are the things that catch us off guard because we're not thinking about the power of scalability.
This is really making me question everything I thought I knew about statistics.
It's a whole new way of looking at the world.
Okay, so we've talked about what black swans are and why we're so bad at predicting them.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But the big question is, what can we actually do about it?
Right. Are we just supposed to live in a constant state of fear waiting for the next disaster?
That doesn't sound very fun.
Not at all. And that's where Taleb introduces this concept of the ludic fallacy.
Ludic fallacy. What's that?
It's this idea that we can treat life like a game with clear rules and predictable outcomes.
Like a casino, where you can calculate the odds of winning.
Exactly. But life is way messier than that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The biggest risks, the true black swans, they often come from outside the system.
Outside the casino walls, so to speak.
Exactly. It's like those casinos that are so focused on catching card counters.
They miss the bigger picture.
They're so worried about someone cheating at blackjack.
That they forget about the possibility of a natural disaster or a power outage.
Things that could shut the whole place down.
Okay, so the ludic fallacy is basically thinking we have more control than we actually do.
It's about mistaking a simplified model of the world for the real thing.
Which is way more complex and unpredictable.
And this connects to our own lives in a big way.
How so?
Well, are we so focused on the known risks, those everyday worries,
Like paying bills and staying healthy.
that we're missing the bigger picture, those
Yeah.
potential black swans that could really shake things up?
It's like I'm so worried about getting a flat tire on my bike.
That you forget about the possibility of a meteor striking the Earth.
Okay, that's a pretty extreme example.
But you get the point. It's about expanding our thinking to include those unlikely but high-impact events.
So how do we do that? If we can't predict these black swans, how will we prepare for them?
That's the brilliant part of Taleb's argument. It's not about becoming some kind of fortune teller.
It's not about knowing exactly what's going to happen.
It's about accepting that we can't know everything and building resilience into our lives.
So instead of asking what will happen,
We ask, what if I'm wrong?
what if the unexpected happens?
Exactly. It's a shift from prediction to preparation.
That sounds like a much healthier way to approach things.
It's about embracing uncertainty, not trying to eliminate it.
Okay, but that sounds really hard. How do we actually do that?
It's about diversifying our investments, cultivating adaptability in our skills.
And fostering a mindset that welcomes challenges.
Exactly. It's about expecting the unexpected and being prepared to adapt rather than clinging to outdated assumptions.
I love that poker analogy that Taleb uses.
Oh yeah, the good players, they don't just focus on their own cards.
They factor in the unknowns, the possibility of a bluff.
They're comfortable with the fact that they can't control everything, and they adjust their approach accordingly.
So it's not about being reckless, it's about being smart about risk.
Exactly. In poker, as in life, the ability to navigate uncertainty is far more valuable than the ability to predict the future.
So instead of trying to predict which black swan will appear,
We focus on building systems and strategies that can withstand a wide range of shocks.
so it's less about specific predictions and more about creating a flexible foundation that can weather any storm.
Precisely. And by shifting our focus from prediction to preparation.
We can start to develop a more robust and resilient approach to navigating a world full of black swans. So it sounds like the big takeaway here is that black swan events, those unpredictable game changers, they're just a part of life.
We can't avoid them completely.
But we don't have to be totally helpless either.
Right. And that's where understanding our own thinking comes in.
Understanding those mental shortcuts, those biases that can trip us up,
It's about recognizing that we don't know everything.
and being open to changing our minds,
Being willing to adapt when things don't go as planned.
which honestly can be pretty tough.
It can be because it means letting go of that illusion of control.
Admitting that we're not always right.
Yeah, but that's also where the real growth happens.
When we can step outside of our comfort zones.
When we can embrace the possibility of being wrong.
Like that saying, the only constant is change.
Exactly. And in a world of black swans, that ability to adapt, that's what really matters.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of black swans, I'm curious to hear what's sticking with you.
Yeah. What are you taking away from all of this?
Maybe it's a new awareness of those mental traps that Taleb talks about.
Or a fresh perspective on risk and uncertainty.
Whatever it is, I hope it helps you navigate a world that's full of surprises, both good and bad.
Remember, the goal isn't to predict the unpredictable.
It's to build resilience to become more adaptable.
To be able to roll with the punches and maybe even come out stronger on the other side.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that mind of yours flexible.
Because in a world of black swans, that's your greatest asset.